Azure Security with Bojan Magusic.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Before we start, I want to put out a personal message. For those of you who have followed my work and content for some time, you know that I started ClearMeasure 10 years ago. We're a software architecture company, and that's the type of consulting we do to help in-house teams be great, to jumpstart them along their way. So all of our work is programming in all of its various forms, and we've done a tremendous amount of DevOps and cloud automation work as well. And we're the North American consulting partner for Octopus Deploy. Now, I haven't done this very often, but I'm putting out a call for anyone who'd like to work with me. We've been running on a backlog of projects for quite a while now, and we need to grow. We need some more .NET software engineers, DevOps engineers who have Octopus Deploy experience and Microsoft Cloud experience. And we're also in need of a few more experienced software architects. And if you followed me for any length of time, you probably understand how I think about software. And if you like the way I think about it, then you'll absolutely love working with me at ClearMeasure. We need to hire some people pretty immediately. So if this has piqued your attention, please go ahead and apply online on the website. And if you have any questions, just send me an email at Jeffrey, Jeffrey, at clear-measure.com. And thank you for indulging me with the interruption. And here's our regularly scheduled episode. Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient and able to deliver world-class results through its ClearMeasure Way methodology. Announcement: my architect forums are going strong and signups for the next sessions are up. And so if you lead a software team and are looking to collaborate with peer architects and peer architect leaders, then sign up at the link in the show notes. And for those who are looking for Programming with Palermo, my dedicated video podcast, just go ahead and search in any of the directories and you'll find it. My guest today on the show is Bojan Magusic, and he is a product manager on the customer acceleration team. Bojan acts as a technology expert for Fortune 500 companies to help them realize the full value of Microsoft Defender for cloud and improve their overall security posture. He has a strong passion for cybersecurity, advancing women in tech and professional development, and he's very interested in building partnerships with other companies to learn how they support, advance, and retain their cyber talent. And in addition to various technical certifications and 18 plus and more coming, he also has received certifications from INSEAD and the Kellogg School of Management. Bojan resides in Dublin, Ireland, and he's just living the dream there. So Bojan, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thank you for having me. I'm great, and what a wonderful introduction. I don't believe I could have actually done it justice or done it any better.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time. Aside from the introduction, I just want to kind of let the listeners know you're the author of the Manning book, Azure Security. And it's in the meat process, so it's coming out very soon. Tell us about the book.
Correct. So Manning and myself have started this project roughly, 1 year ago, where I've been in the security space for more than a couple of years now, and I was really looking for this opportunity. How do I share, my knowledge more broadly? I work with Microsoft, and having interacted with a bunch of, amazing folks who work on not just developing, deploying, as well as, all the different aspects of, the different Azure security services. I thought, the time was right for me to also share this knowledge more broadly. Not just because we obviously see a gap, you know it also best. We see also a gap with regards to people who have, knowledge of Azure security, At the same time, unfortunately, we also see number of attacks rising and being more sophisticated, and not just, their overall volume rising as well, which are both alarming trends. And I felt, the time was right for me to do this now. So Manning and myself, started this amazing project, and hopefully it's going to be starting to be published beginning of May. And if
Nice.
folks are interested, they can obviously go to Manning's website and purchase it there for even cheaper than on Amazon. So just a pro tip.
Yeah, awesome. And for user group leaders, Manning has always been pretty generous in giving coupons for free books to user groups for giveaway, if my memory serves me correct. So,
Correct. And I currently even Manning is running a promotion. So there was not a better time to buy my book if you're into Azure Security than this month,
hmm.
because the promotion is still running. So you can always check it out at Manning's website when you go there and just type in Azure Security, which is far easier to type in than my first name and my last name. I'll admit that.
So I received a question from a coworker who has a teenage son, and she was saying, "Hey, all these careers in technology. My son was thinking that he needed to, have a career in security, in cybersecurity. What is that? Is that close to programming? Is that close to IT? At the broadest level, is security a job title, or where do you see it intersecting? You have developers traditionally, and then you have the IT pros or sysadmins, and now and a lot of companies do have security specific job positions. How do you wrap your mind around this and where that overlap resides?
I mean, it's such a great point. I believe historically, cybersecurity was seen as a job. Now with this shortage, it's even become like this lustrous career where, to your point, like folks are even saying, hey, why does my, kid doesn't, pursue a career in cybersecurity? But at the same time, it's also a vocation for so many other folks, because you're really doing meaningful work. You're helping, companies secure their business and focus on what matters most to them, and not be hit by, the some ransomware attack or something else you might see in the news. So it's essentially everywhere. So it's like this fabric that's underneath everything that we use, be it digital services that we use to communicate with each other, even, with loved ones. So it's like it's this underlying fabric of everything that we've actually built. And to your point, like historically, it was mostly with regards to sysadmins, operations folks, even networking back in the day, with a lot of on premises and private data centers. But now with the cloud, it's literally everywhere, because you're
Mm-hmm.
now accessing like cloud applications which are not running locally, but could be like in a public cloud provider's data center, be it Microsoft, be it Amazon, be it, for example, Salesforce, if you're using their CRM. And this kind of app economy has really both created opportunities as well as challenges for cybersecurity folks, because it presented them with new challenges that they needed to actually face and secure the whole environment. One very, very wise person once told me that when their, child told them, I want to go into cybersecurity, they were like happy. And I was like, well, that's what you want to hear from a parent. But I asked them and peppered them, what made you so happy about it? They were like, my child is never going to worry about finding a job. And I believe that just echoes it, because it's that, fabric of everything that's, surrounding us, and these digital services and apps on which the economy runs nowadays.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, as a list of topics and breaking down this concept of security, your book has just a tremendous amount of information in it. But now it is labeled Azure Security. So besides just general things, we've talked on the show about the OWASP top 10 and layman security and security for your family, and coaching how your family members use email, and the phishing or the smishing text message links that are going around. What is Azure Security? What was the focus there? And how did you carve out, specific things? And what did you include from just general cybersecurity?
I mean, there are a couple of things there that I like to share with you and the folks tuning in. Firstly, it's a very, very broad area. So Azure Security covers mostly specific Azure services that companies can use to security applications they're building and running on Azure. So it's kind of mostly focusing on platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. Then there's this whole world of Microsoft security, which is happening in the software as a service space. So that one I already felt was very, very good covered in other, books out there. And I really wanted to kind of hone in what was kind of my unique skills and my unique experiences, which was mostly around infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. And the book speaks about that. I'll just echo one CISO that I worked with who told me like security is like really easy to understand, and no pun intended. He was like, every business has something that they do. When you figure out how you actually make sure that you can pay folks, like how do you make money, you actually need to just protect that business. And I know this sounds like very, very simple. It's incredibly difficult to do because you're working with vulnerabilities in code, both the ones that have been found and known, the ones that have yet to be discovered and are unknown. So you need to also put not just people, but also technology and processes around this. So you have a way of managing it also going forward. And the way you do that is then, identifying risk, like what are the risks to this business that's, critical for us as an organization, regardless if it's a flower shop, and nothing against flower shops. I need to pause by one now when I go back to home, or be it like one of the big companies out there, like a Fortune 500. They all provide a service. They all generate revenue from that service. So identifying what they need to protect, and then listing the risks and what are you going to do from solutions, like people, processes around it to ensure that you minimize that risk, is kind of, for me, at a very, very high level what security is about. Now, what this book is doing, it's going more into the native Azure security services, and it's really practical. So I wrote it with the persona in mind, and this is like, Bob, or it can also be Alice. And Bob is, your security engineer with 2 years of experience working in any public cloud platform. And he obviously wants to develop and run an application on Azure. So how does he go about implementing security as part of it? So he can focus more on developing securely as well as his application, and not worry about, what he hears in the news about ransomware attacks, etc. And there's this whole set of different Azure security services that can be applied to then minimize the risk of his application and his environment being compromised. So the book is really practical while still having those theoretical concepts that make it also easier for folks who are maybe not a security engineer, but could be also a developer, like a DevOps engineer working slightly with Azure, who also want to secure their applications. So it aims to cater to all of them, but yeah, the security engineers, the application developers, those would be like the personas I wrote the book in mind with.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So with the theme of Azure Security, Microsoft has pumped up, the brand name of Microsoft Defender, and there's some others in there. But break down specifically what development teams should be looking at, because they're used to taking a web application or an API service and throwing it over to app service, or running something, Azure Service Bus. Okay, I got some queues and I got a little job that's reading messages from a queue, and I got an Azure SQL database. It works great. I know Azure's keeping me safe, but besides the built-in stuff, what should they make sure to also put into their environment most of the time?
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
The thing I like about the book, it's also approaching you from, an incremental perspective. let's say if you're now a developer who's been, working on developing applications and looking to run them on Azure, chances are you've been doing this for a while now. And the book is not trying to reinvent the wheel or boil the ocean by saying, hey, these are, the 50 things you need to do now, because objectively folks are too busy to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it provides also like learning modules or specific scenarios where developers, can find themselves like, and you touched on it, like if I'm developing an application and if my organization has an environment to kind of put a web application firewall or a web solution in front of it, how do I go about doing this with Azure Security? But instead of just focusing on one solution, there's also this very, very important concept that you and I are both aware of, and the people tuning in as well, which is defense in depth. And defense in depth speaks about how you can minimize the risk to your environment by, instead of deploying just one layer of a security, in a meaningful way, deploying like several layers that work together to actually prevent then bad actors or threat actors, whatever you want to call them, with finding success with their attacks in your environment. And I'd like to offer an example for this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can go both ways. I can go sports or I can go like history. I'm a huge sports fan, like I'm going to go with sports. So if you, and I, being European, I got to revert back to soccer. Like
Sure.
that's my bread and butter, and I'll use soccer as an example. Like if you need, imagine if like the threat actor is like the person who has the ball. If they want to like perform an attack by just, score a goal, and
Mm-hmm.
if you only have the goalkeeper, that means they just need to get, the ball past the goalkeeper and they already won in this, fictional cybersecurity game.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start with a defense in depth mindset, you start kind of adding more players between the attacker and the goalkeeper. So it's much more challenging than if you need to also have go past one defender and then the goalkeeper and then two defenders, three defenders. And no pun intended, but that's why there's so many different, defender products out there, because they all provide these meaningful layers of security that can then minimize the overall risk to the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very much like the weakest link approach. You can have, very, very capable solutions working together, but you always need to understand like what is your overall exposure, or people refer to them as entry points. So how could potentially your environment be compromised and minimize the risk of that happening? And that is what defense in depth is speaking about. It's ensuring that you have layers, not just layers for the sake of having layers. They obviously need to be applied in a meaningful way, but you need to have multiple to really then effectively secure in your environment, because things happen. There might be, an issue with one layer, like misconfiguration or whatnot. And by having multiple, you're able also to minimize the impact of that.
Okay. So let's say that you were working with a team and they're developing or upgrading an application that's hosted in Azure. Are there a few layers that you just find yourself never leaving out?
I definitely can also draw upon my experience from this week. So I'm engaged with one client who's, developing like this big application that's going to be running on Azure.
Mm-hmm.
And a big thing for them, it's just, going and identifying like, what does this application do? So does it handle like credit card information or sensitive data?
Mm-hmm.
They obviously need to secure that, but they also need to secure the resources itself on which the application is running. It's always important to mention whenever you use like a public cloud provider's platform, be it Azure or any other, there is this, shared responsibility model. You're essentially entering a partnership there. And it's not a partnership where you can actually offload everything to the public cloud provider. There are things they're responsible for, but there are also things you're responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of going back to your question, there's some things like, access controls, identity and access management that never get old, because they're obviously the way you access those resources. But the big thing also, it's around, which is not very sexy, it's around security hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
Security hygiene is not sexy because it's been around for a while now. It's going about, patching your resources against known vulnerabilities. It's really that baseline you need to have in your environment for you to claim that you actually have implemented security effectively and
Mm-hmm.
that you have like a certain level of security out there. And that is obviously tricky because you need to be constantly doing it. In the book, I also compare it with like going to the gym. You constantly need to be going to the gym, you need to be putting in the work. And only after you do it consistently, you're able to see gains and returns for it. And that is also applicable, I believe, to security hygiene. It's not sexy because it's been around for a while. You know, it's not the buzzword like a SIEM or XDR, but
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very important. And when you get that right, and when you have an inventory of the resources on which, you know, comprise your application that you need to do your business, I believe that's also one thing I always touch in my conversations as well. But a big thing nowadays, it's also like DevSecOps, or how do you develop code more securely? And one way is obviously using things like infrastructure as code. You can, for example, even use like Git for version control, and then use things like infrastructure as code templates to programmatically deploy your code to the public cloud environment, for example, Azure.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, when you consider it as an end-to-end flow, like on one side you have the developer who's, you know, developing code. They're going to check it into their repo. And then you might have like things like infrastructure as code templates, which are going to take that code. Maybe they're even going to, you know, create an image, and they want to then, you know, push it, or depending on what you want to do with it, you know, run it in your environment, like on your clusters. When you think of that end-to-end like scenario, you really want to ensure that you have security, not just when you go about deploying resources, because that is obviously important, but that's already the end of the road. So when you discover, let's say, a vulnerability in clusters, it can also be in the underlying compute resources.
Mm-hmm.
Then you obviously need to first, you know, take them offline. You need to patch them. You need to remediate misconfigurations, etc. And while you're doing that, you're obviously not providing the digital service that, you know, your company is charging customers for. So it kind of impacts your business, which is why I believe the biggest shift that I'm seeing currently in my conversations and engagements and projects is really this focus more towards implementing more of security further left, or shift left as it's referred to, and really making sure that security is embedded while you're developing code, while you're actually checking it out, checking it into your repo. Like, are you scanning it for secrets, credentials? When you use infrastructure as code templates, do they have vulnerabilities? Are you checking the configuration of the resources that you're deploying? I believe that's something I find myself also very, very heavily having conversations around this in the last couple of weeks and months.
Yeah, there's, that's an interesting point. There's a lot of talk that's been around the effectiveness of static analysis in finding bugs or things that might lead to bugs, and that's backed up by research. And we talked about Capers Jones on this show about how his findings is that static analysis is one of the big three quality control techniques. But I take your point. That same technique can be used to find problems that could lead to vulnerabilities. Are there some examples of what things that you've seen found out there in the wild that were caught by static analyzers?
Unfortunately, not just me. A lot of the breaches that happened when were, if I go back roughly 1 or 2 years, it was about, you know, secrets or connection strings, or just, you know, account keys like exposed publicly to the internet.
Mm,
And organizations not even, you know, having awareness of that, and folks who obviously found it and used it thinking they won the jackpot.
mm,
So a lot of it goes back to your point, to those basics, to how are you doing that analysis for the things that should be caught there, things that shouldn't actually happen, like you shouldn't have secrets or connection strings in your, you know, public facing repositories where, you know, anyone with a decent enough internet connection beyond the modem, which are not isn't used any longer, can, you know, really breach your environment. And that is
yeah,
obviously goes back to a little bit about the shared responsibility model, about educating yourself. What are you as an organization and a developer responsible for? But it also goes back in what can you do to do this automatically? Because no one wants to do things manually nowadays. You want to
yeah,
do it automatic, and you want to put like automations in place that catch this as soon as possible, so you don't waste time in just fixing it, or God forbid being breached. And it's not just to avoid attacks. There's obviously research has been done that's shown that depending on the research in question, but there's like a free time, more cost reduction if you actually discover vulnerabilities while you're developing
Oh,
code
yeah.
compared to when it's already in production,
Hmm.
because then it's obviously too late. And not to speak about the everything else, which is like secondary effects. You need to take that application offline, or have a limited amount of resources available to your clients, etc.
What are your favorite tools for static analysis for security vulnerabilities?
Well, it's kind of tricky to ask, because if you and I were to have had this conversation back in November of last year, I would
Hmm.
probably have gone strongly with GitHub Advanced Security.
Okay.
I mean, that's something I'm very, very familiar with. I see a lot of value in it. But what I'm also now very, very intrigued about is what Microsoft released in November of last year, which is Defender for DevOps. And Defender for DevOps it's not really one product. I mean, obviously, it's like an umbrella term used for a set of capabilities that allow you to integrate with tools like GitHub Advanced Security and kind of cover that end to end of, developer coding, checking in, doing static code analysis, using infrastructure as code templates if they want to deploy. So it's really kind of complementing the great things which GitHub Advanced Security had from the very beginning.
Okay. Interesting. Now, I'm guessing it runs as a step in your build process.
Correct. So there is what's referred to as the Microsoft DevOps Security extension that you can add, for example, to your pipeline. And for that, pipeline, and for that extension, you're able then to realize that value. So for example, going back to the previous, example we touched upon, which was secret scanning,
Hmm.
which is still very, very valid, and it still should be performed. You can just add it as a step to your pipeline.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. The fact that it's just available for anybody. And you don't have to reach out for a commercial product that you have to pay extra for and justify budgets internally. So, well, that's great. You mentioned DevSecOps. And I've heard arguments for, hey, DevOps, okay, you can stick extra stuff in DevOps, but security doesn't apply in the middle of Dev and Ops. It's just another thing that applies in every step, just like quality, just like your other, traits that you want. So what's your view on actually making a term DevSecOps versus making security apply to every step of DevOps?
I believe I'd like to or even offer an example. Like historically, even Google had this like role, and I believe Microsoft as well. They had like one person who was tasked with developing code, and they had another person who was responsible for testing the code, like a software development, tester. And what they realized very, very quickly is that was actually misguided.
Mm.
Not that those two folks and roles weren't like prolific and you had very bright people on them, but you should make security part of the software development lifecycle itself. And only when you do that, you can actually then minimize the vulnerabilities found in code, which is why after a while they just scrapped the role which was tasked with testing, and they say, look, if you're developing code, you're actually also on the hook for the security.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe there's great value in it, but I also see it's a journey. Security as such is very, very broad. Even if we now talk about, DevSecOps, there's going to be like a lot of organizations at different stages of their maturity journey. So if it goes back to them needing to start from scratch, or maybe not having a very mature security practice to begin with, they obviously need to build it out. They need to mature it. Now we could argue where the SecOps or DevSecOps rank, in that like bucket list or in that priority list.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue like it's number 6, it's number 7, it's number 3, but there will be definitely a conversation to be had either sooner or later about adding it as one very, very important aspect of their overall security, especially when they're developing applications, because a lot of it goes back to that app economy of a lot of applications being there available and us needing to, embed security as early on as possible.
Yeah, I like that. It goes back to the old adage of bringing things forward in the process to prevent bad things versus catching the bad things and doing rework later in the process.
I couldn't agree more. Ounce of prevention versus the pound of cure, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's the same problem, so many different places. All right. So as we close up here, is there anything else that under the umbrella of Azure Security, and I'm just kind of glancing at the table of contents in your book that you want to highlight? And of course, we'll put links to the book in the show notes. But anything you want to highlight before we close up here?
Firstly, I want to, say a heartfelt thank you for having me on. I mean, there's nothing I like more than getting, on a soapbox and speaking about security, and especially Azure Security. So I hope it was of real value. As a thank you, I'll also make sure to add code that folks listening to this can use to get 45% off the book, valid for March and April. What I'm most excited about is the later chapters, because the later chapters cover the likes of Defender for DevOps, which is still melting and shaping, and which is still not as, well documented or well known to folks. But it surfaces and covers, this such an important area, which is DevSecOps. So that's one when I was, still writing it, where I felt the most optimism about, because I saw a whole set of capabilities that historically weren't necessarily part of what was referred to as Azure Security. Whereas Azure Security was more focused on runtime, threat detection, on detecting and remediating misconfigurations, on your, Azure network security, which is a whole different sub area inside of Azure Security. And what I'm most now, intrigued about is this, Defender for DevOps capabilities that we've been working on for a while, and for organizations to start, testing those and validating their capabilities. So that's one thing I would like to highlight. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. We'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes. And I thank you for coming on the show. This has been really intriguing. I love learning even as I'm interviewing. So this is great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.